let's just jump straight in and let's talk about toast for just a brief minute. So a lot of us have toast for breakfast, and obviously there's lots of options for what to put on top. And I guess my question to you is, does it matter what we put on our toast? Does our choice of breakfast influence our day-to-day lives? Does it impact, for example, our mental health? Does the choice of my toast topping change how I really feel? Can any of these items help with my mental health, perhaps anxiety? And the reason why I beg of this very interesting toast-based question is because of what I've seen in the media recently around claims that perhaps toast toppings can make a real difference to our lives. So, for example, we saw, and this was the first article I saw, of course, on the Daily Mail, was around if we ate Marmite on toast, then perhaps through the vitamin B6, it can ward off bad thoughts. And I'm sure we're familiar with all these sorts of news articles that regularly go around that make some extremely outlandish claim, which potentially could be interpreted as something meaningful. But it's hard to know. It's hard to know. Should we say, ditch the jam, ditch the marmalade? It's Marmite to go. Who knows? But I was interested in this claim, and particularly in encouraging everybody to take this critical view of, well, let's have a deeper look at things. Because it wasn't just this one terrible Daily Mail journalistic article that was presented. It was a number of them. And you can see that, and in particular, it invokes the nature of science and scientists as objective, robust, rigorous people, and thus, when we hear that they encourage us to do something, we should follow it with all good intentions. So what do we really think about these? I mean, this is the latest in a long line of very absurd things, but what's the evidence for this claim? And that's what I want to encourage everybody taking this 12-week course, is to think and do a little bit of digging at the evidence and find out and do some critical evaluation, see what does this mean for our practice, our day-to-day lives. So that asks, well, what evidence would we find acceptable to back up this claim? So they've made a claim. What evidence are we expecting to find? So brands in the UK are legislated to ensure they don't make misleading claims. So the consumer protection from unfair trading regulations means you can't mislead or harass consumers by including false information, omitting crucial information, or using aggressive sales strategies. So there must be some truth perhaps in this. So what sort of evidence might we look for? We might go for epidemiological. We might look at, for example, historical relationships between Marmite production and anxiety, and have a look at whether on years they tended to produce much higher levels of Marmite, that generally in populations there were less diagnoses of anxiety-related disorders, perhaps. We could look at experimental methodologies, so we could give different groups Marmite or marmalade for their morning toast, and then we could track their anxiety over the next few months. So that's a pretty common technique. Perhaps we only need experiential evidence. So individuals reporting less anxiety after eating Marmite. They just say, not only do I enjoy the taste, which, by the way, I hate. I'm afraid I'm a hater rather than a lover. Those who experience that not only enjoy the eating experience, but they then say, no, it helps me relax, it helps me be calm, it helps keep my thoughts away, or whatever that might be. You might suggest that it has some sort of legal evidence. So there might be some company commissioned trials. Hopefully then they would have unambiguous results that say, yes, clearly Marmite is the thing that matters. And they might even compare that with some other breakfast alternatives. And why stop with toast? Toast isn't the be all and end all. You might want to instead have a look at cereals and eggs and all sorts of other things. Or perhaps you might even say, do you know what? None of these evidence sources alone would be enough. We need to look at the body of evidence as a whole to say what we should do next. And that's generally some of the starting principles of evidence-based practice. So let's have a little dig into the articles themselves. Okay, so that you can see some of the text here, whether you love it or hate it, which is a classic. It was used originally as a marketing tool for Marmite. That are you a lover or a hater? that it could help us keep calm and fight stress. And interesting new research shows that high levels of vitamins in Marmite can quell anxiety by interfering with your brain chemistry. Firstly, anybody who makes any big statement using very ambiguous terming like brain chemistry can clearly go and study a little bit more themselves. But we should be cautious about the claims that they make. But here they're using and citing academics or scientific evidence as support for this strong claim. And they're saying specifically it's made with concentrated yeast extract, so it's rich in B vitamins, and that encourages individuals to perhaps reduce their anxiety and depression. And so here it tells you even scientists at Reading University, a reputable university, carried out a trial and said more than 300 adults were split into different groups, and then, they were given tablets. That's right. The research here has, unfortunately, nothing to do with toast. Get rid of that. Don't need it anymore, because it's got nothing to do with toast. In fact, it's not really got anything to do with Marmite whatsoever. Let's have a look at the actual evidence itself. The evidence is here, a journal article published in Human Psychopharmacology, published by David Field and friends. And it talks about high-dose vitamin B6 supplementation, reducing anxiety and strengthening visual surround suppression. Obviously, the latter not quite so sexy in the journal articles and in the media articles, so easier to talk about anxiety. And you can see here they've got the classic bit of information you get about a journal article, the abstract, and you start to get a little bit of information. So let me tell you a little bit more about their study. What they actually had was, and specifically relating to the claim being made by the journal articles, 88 students who had a B6 tablet versus 87 students who had a placebo, and that was a lactose tablet. So as opposed to having B6 or peroxidine hydrochloride, they had a simple lactose placebo. And they were asked to complete a 44-item anxiety scale used both before and after taking the tablets. Interestingly, both groups reported experiencing less anxiety. So perhaps in of itself, the testing experience might have caused individuals to feel a little bit of stress and anxiety. But they claimed that there was a greater decrease seen in the B6 group than in the control group. Although, please note that this wasn't considered to be statistically significant. When you dig in a little bit further, you also found that they tested B12, and they also found fairly similar results for that. They also tested 4 different elements of anxiety and found it particularly relevant to generalized anxiety and a little bit social anxiety. And so the author said, many foods, including tuna, chickpeas, and many fruits and vegetables, contain vitamin B6. However, high doses used in this trial suggest that supplements would be necessary to have a positive effect on mood. So this is a clear statement on the, and this was a statement made by the authors and by Reading University outside of the publication as a press comment, saying that clearly foods might be useful, but really they're talking about supplements here. So how bad is this? And what does that mean for whether we should have Marmite on toast? I've already thrown my toast away, so what do I do now? Well, let's have a look at the evidence. Okay, so what we've got is the B6 tablets. So they had 100 milligrams of B6, peroxidine hydrochloride. So if we have a look at other alternatives, so maybe Marmite's just too much. Maybe let's have a look at some alternatives. So one banana of about 100 grams, which is your average banana size, it has 0.4 milligrams of B6. So to have the same amount as was studied in the experiment that we described, you'd need 250 bananas, which clearly is more than one person could manage. 100 grams of tuna. It's about a can of tuna, has about 1 milligram. So you could perhaps consider 69 cans of tuna based on the average size. I think it's probably a bit too much tuna as well, if I'm honest, isn't it? Or you could have Berocca, for example, a multivitamin tablet for your breakfast. A lot of people don't think they really work. They have 8.22 milligrams. So you could have 12 Beroccas, That seems a little bit more achievable. I mean, that's a lot of Baroccas, but that seems a little bit achievable. But when we actually have a look at Marmite itself, Marmite contains 0.57 milligrams per 100 grams. And this is from a paper by Smith et al. In 2017, who assessed the vitamin qualities of Marmite for another piece of research, because that's the only statistics I could find that very specifically told us about B6. But that means really there's very, very, very small amounts of B6 in Marmite. It doesn't really make sense why they said put Marmite on toast rather than eat a couple of bananas, have some tuna, or maybe start the day with a Barocca. So a single serving of Marmite really isn't going to do much. I mean, you have a few grams, if that, on any general piece of toast, unless you really like it thick, in which case you are disgusting. But the issue with Marmite is actually a single serving of Marmite, a few tiny grams, contains 14% of your daily salt, which means technically, if you're going to have that much Marmite, you're more likely to have issues with sodium poisoning than you are likely to counter any anxiety experiences or symptoms. So clearly, this is a little bit silly, a little bit ridiculous. But I want to pick on a couple of other kind of dimensions that I've identified along the way. The first is the sample size. So whilst it claimed the project itself as a whole had 300 or 400 participants, we actually only had a very small comparison of 88 students with the tablet and 87 students on the placebo. And so what I've done here is done a little bit of statistical analyses for you. And so they claimed in the manuscript to hold power to detect a D of 0.3. So a D refers traditionally to a Cohen's D, and this represents the size of an effect. So the larger the D, the larger the difference. The difference between the no B6 tablet group and the B6 tablet group. So we might expect, if it was really going to be very impactful, that there would be a big difference. And they reported an effect of D equals 0.37 when they compared pre and post anxiety of the B6 group. So demonstrates that, and 0.3 would be a fairly modest effect. However, when I have a look at the data itself, so I do what's known as a power analysis to see whether we've got enough data to be confident about the effects we're claiming. And we would need a lot more participants to be able to be confident in the sizes of effects that we've spoken about. As I've said previously, when we actually look at it, we should be caring about the difference between placebo and B6 tablet groups in the difference between pre and post, and that's not what they've reported here. And indeed, the effect of it was so small it was non-significant. So they would clearly need a lot more participants to be able to make confident claims about that. So clearly, there's a study design issue here as well. We've got a relatively small sample size. Now you must be thinking, Tom, okay, you've done it. It's not really about the toast. It's not really about Marmite. It's not really about the right amount of B6, and it's not really about this study design. Okay. All suboptimal. Unfortunately, I have to keep going. So conflicts of interest are really important in research. Unfortunately, and this project says they have no conflicts of interest to be declared, which is fantastic. And so conflicts of interest can be a wide range of things. So it could be somebody's been funded to run a project to provide evidence for a certain case. It could have swayed their judgment somehow, but it doesn't even have to be financial. They might be on a board of directors for a company selling it or something like that. There could be loads of different types of conflicts of interest, but fortunately, they've said there are none in this project. So we can move on. Until, unfortunately, we look at the acknowledgement section, in which case the authors thank InnoPure for donating vitamin B6 and B12 tablets, which is very, very interesting. So they obviously use this space to acknowledge lots of other people who have contributed to the research. So well done and props to you guys. Vitamin tablets were supplied by InnoPure. So that's now twice they've told us that. And even put in the website so we can have a browse of their catalogue if we wish. clearly, people don't give out stuff for free for no reason. You can't say that if I'm testing the efficacy of vitamin tablets to counter things like anxiety symptoms, that is not a conflict of interest, that it is not problematic, that there was some clear, here we are, have some of my profit for free. Take some of this stuff and do what you like with it. Now, hopefully what they're saying here is that they donated the tablets and they didn't have any impact in how the findings were communicated or what analyses were chosen or what was done to conduct the study. But unfortunately, that's a little bit ambiguous. So clearly, a little bit of a grey line here. And you may think, Tom, get over yourself. And fair comment. What about just have a look at the data yourself? Come up with, what you think is the most reasonable analysis of the data, assuming that they collected the data fairly and appropriately and all these other things, and you can try it yourself. Fortunately, that's not possible either. And this is where we tap into the field of open science, open research, open scholarship. And we can see here that they have a data availability statement, which is fantastic. But unfortunately, what they say is data is available upon reasonable request. Now, what reasonable request means is, between me and you, no idea. Answers on a postcard. But what we also need to see and recognize here is that when historically meta research has tested this assumption, so when people have said, yeah, ask me for the data and I'll send it to you, more often than not, people don't send that data. They say they haven't got it anymore, say it's not saved, dog ate it, can't share it with you because it's sensitive data, all these sorts of things. Well, in which case, that statement isn't factually true, is it? So what we know from that sort of meta research is even statements that claim to be open and receptive to reasonable requests aren't so. So we can't even test the claims that they've made with the data. We can't check it. We can't do additional things or run different analyses and see if the conclusions are robust to them. We just have to accept that what is written on the paper is true. And that in of itself is a little bit of a stretch for individuals who are claiming to be interested in evidence-based practice and wanting to be able to use evidence in the best way to inform practice. It leaves us with a few more question marks. And now, if you think the press published this claim without any motive themselves, these are the adverts that popped up around the news article. You really couldn't make this up. So for anybody who's not based in the UK, Holland and Barrett are a chain who sell things around health and well-being, including, as you can see as being advertised on the side, tablets, multivitamins and otherwise, and minerals and all the other things that people take to feel better. So I'm not saying, obviously, that this is all a conspiracy by Holland and Barrett. I don't, and indeed other shops are available. I think what this is clear influence of things like programs and algorithms from newspapers generating things that hopefully that will then create value for the people who are advertising with them. Clearly, they've got it right on this case, a perfect alignment in terms of talking about multivitamins, but it just, again, adds lots of questions about what is really going on here. Why are they promoting this research, which, if you then break it down, doesn't really do what they say it does? Eating Marmite isn't going to have the same effect when the milligrams of B6 is tiny comparatively. So clearly there's something going on here. Perhaps poor journalistic reporting. Perhaps. Now, these are some quotes from the author. They say, to make this a realistic choice, further research is needed to identify other nutrition-based interventions that benefit mental well-being, allowing different dietary interventions to be combined in future to provide greater results. One potential option is to combine supplements with talking therapies. And so that was from their press statement. Or, as they discussed in the paper, these findings raise the interesting, currently largely unaddressed question of whether dietary modulation of the excitation-inhibition balance might modulate visual task performance or prove to be therapeutic for patient groups. Clearly, they're being quite careful about what they claim here. No mention of anything toast-based. They're saying if we want to think more holistically about what's most likely to have the greatest impact, things like anxiety are likely to be kind of treated and tackled in a lot of different ways. And clearly nutrition is one dimension, talking therapies and others is another. So this clear process of evidence has been distorted along the way. So from the point of being generated, I think we can accept there's some suboptimalities in terms of the influence of conflicts of interest, in terms of the study design and the inadequate sample size and things like that. And then we can see the way in which it's being communicated might be considered a little bit suboptimal, given the distinction between milligrams in practical terms, in eating terms, and in tablets and things. And then there's this extension to these broader claims that are made. And so I want to be very, very clear. This isn't an attack on the activities of Professor Field or indeed his co-authors. That's not the intention. The intention here is to encourage people to be critical of the evidence that's presented to them and to really be interested in it and dig down into that level of detail. And then you provide much more nuanced, interesting reflections and comments. So, for example, their work clearly states Marmite contains relatively little B6. And the press release states only, whilst previous studies have produced evidence that multivitamins or Marmite can reduce stress levels, few studies have been carried out to see what drives this effect. And indeed, there have been a few studies that have looked at multivitamins and specifically Marmite, looking at whether that can influence any of these things. But clearly that's misrepresenting what's happened in this process. And so I encourage everybody, and I hope this exercise in really digging down into the detail, perhaps far more than you really wanted to, is about our need to be critical, to reflect, to think about different sources of evidence and to consider how they come together to inform what we do. And also the importance of being open, both from the perspective of the research design and sharing data and these sorts of things, but open about looking at different interpretations, different perspectives, and reflecting upon and challenging our beliefs. I hope this has been a really fun start to our journey. As I said, this is only the very first half element of what is a 12-week course on evidence-based practice, looking at how do we identify sources of evidence, how do we evaluate these sources, how do we integrate or synthesize them, and then how do we translate that into practice. And so if you're interested in these, whether you are a student or perhaps you're even an educator and you've got 12 weeks worth of sessions to fill, consider going on the Open Science Framework. The link is below, where you can find all the lectures, seminars, notes, activities, everything you need to run this and to check out and to become more confident in being able to critically evaluate towards evidence-based practice. I hope you've enjoyed. And if you've got any questions or feedback, feel free to get in touch. Take care.